Hi, so today we are going to work on creating those photos of flowers that you see, which combine a picture of the flower, which is quite sharp, with some kind of movement, some motion blur. So you see some really nice examples of this. It's really nice kind of still life project to try at home. And I'm going to show you how to do it and take a few pictures and get you to a situation where you can do this at home. All you need to do this is a flower. I have got a rose because it was the only thing available in Tesco where I am. But it will do. You can try all sorts of different flowers. The other things that you're going to need are a room which is big enough to let you have some distance between the subject you're shooting, the flower, and a dark background. So you don't have to have a studio, but you do have to have a room which is of a reasonable size to keep the light from the main lights that are lighting the flower from lighting the background as well, because what you want is a dark background. What you also need is a flash, a camera, a trigger to fire that flash. So some off-camera flash, simple setup. I've just got one flash here. I'll show you that in a minute. And I have got two lights. So these are both basic lights. They're both lighting me right now, but they're essentially just lights that, but light bulbs in them, just constant lights. So they're going to stay on throughout this whole thing. And we're also going to use the flash to light the flower. So what happens is you get photos like these, and what happens is you're getting that sharp part of the flower is caused by the flash firing. When a flash fires, it fires at, let's say, depending on the power, but it can be, so let's say it's around 1,000th of a second. It's in the hundredths or it's 1,000th or so of a second for a basic flash. So that very fast burst of light in a dark room, even if something's moving, is going to make something appear sharp. We're then going to combine that with use of the constant light. So having the constant light on in the room means that when we move our camera or move the flower, and we have a longer shutter duration of say a second or 2 seconds or half a second, any movement will appear as blur. So basically the situation you want to get to is one, we're going to do two separate things. We're going to turn on our lights, not our flash, our constant lights. They can be lamps, lights in the room, whatever, as long as they're relatively close to the flower and relatively far from the background. If you get light spilling onto the background will no longer be dark. We want those lights we want to set an exposure in our camera where we can see the flower. So we turn off the flash, then we take a shot with the constant lights, and we want to aim for a longer shutter speed. Let's say we aim for a 1 second exposure. So we get an exposure in the camera where we're getting the flower exposed how we want it. Yeah, we're going to have motion blur, but that's fine because we actually want that in the shot later on. So we take one shot at, let's go for a second, and we adjust the aperture and the ISO to give us a 1 second exposure. That might be f11 and ISO 100, whatever it is. Don't stick to those numbers, but do your few test shots yourself. Just the constant lights, flash off. Yeah, to get to a 1 second exposure. Make sure you have 1 second as your exposure, and adjust the other settings to match that. Yeah, so that's your first task, and I'll show you doing that now. Keep adjusting the settings and the flash and the constant light power. You can move it away or closer if you want to, but get the first exposure so it looks like this. So you can see some movement when you move your camera, but the flower is bright enough in the shot. Then keep the aperture and the ISO exactly how you have got them, but then let's put your shutter speed to 200th of a second. So that should be, well, depending on your camera's sync speed, usually it's 200 or 250th. So let's go to your camera's sync speed, to assuming it's 200th a second or 250th a second, find out what that is, and put the shutter speed on that sync speed, and then take another shot, and the shot should be totally dark because the shutter speed has come down from 1 second to 250th, and you've got no ambient light in there. Okay, that's fine. And now turn the flash on. And then, so you're going to have your trigger on your camera, and you're going to turn the flash on a manual setting on the back or with your trigger, and then adjust the flash power until you get a perfect exposure of the flower. And you should see, don't adjust the aperture, don't adjust the ISO, keep those as they are, but just adjust the flash power at 1/200th of a second with the aperture and ISO how it was when you got the first shot with the constant lights. And then do 200th of a second, just change that, and turn the flash on, and then adjust the flash power to get a correct exposure of the of the flower, not of the flash. Correct exposure of the flower with the flash, and you should have a nice sharp shot of the flash. A nice sharp shot of the flower. Okay, sorry, getting flash and flower confused. So you've adjusted the flash power to get a correct exposure of the flower. Yeah. Now, so you're going to have two. So if you do that shot, you have a nice sharp shot of the flower, and then with the constant lights, you have an ambient exposure. So now turn the shutter speed back to 1 second and take your shot. So what happens is the flash correctly exposes the flower with the flash, and the ambient light lets you introduce some movement into the shot. So as you move your camera, try side to side, spirals, zoom in and out, all this sort of stuff, and you will see that you capture both the movement in the flower and the and the flash causes a sharp capture on the sensor of the flower as well. So you've got two things going on in this exposure. You've got an ambient exposure caused by constant light, which is captured by the shutter speed being open for that amount of time, and you have a flash exposure. Remember that flash is not impacted by shutter speed because the flash duration is so fast, say 1,000th of a second, the shutter opens to let in ambient light for a second, in this example that we're doing now, and the flash fires just once. So that flash firing just once, even if the shutter's open for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds, the flash only fires once in that time, and that one burst of light is what causes that burst of light and creates that sharp capture of the flower. So yeah, I'll just recap what you need to do. 1, get in a room which is big enough like this, which is reasonably dark and dim. You can draw the blinds, shut the curtains, and separate yourself from the background. Whatever, put a black sheet or something dark. It doesn't have to be black, it can be grey. You can do this in a garage if you have one. And have your flower away from the background. And then, all my lights around here, I'm going to show you now, my 2 lights here are quite close to the flower, and the flash is also quite close to the flower. You can see that the flash is at an angle, so it's not shooting directly onto the background. It flashes an angle, which is going to look nice in the shots. And we have these I've got 2 lights here, which you can see. These are studio lights just on constant power. They're not going to flash, but you could use lamps, standard lamps, torches, whatever you want, as long as they're constant and they stay on. LED lights, whatever lighting you've got around and available. Okay, so constant lights on, flash off, first of all, and get a shot which is correctly exposed, and let's go for a 1 second exposure. Remember, 1 second, okay, yeah, it's going to be blurred, but we want that blur. So you're going to do get your camera set up, manual mode on your camera, shutter speed 1 second, adjust your ISO and your aperture until you get a correctly exposed blurry photo of a flower. So you should see the red quite clearly against the black background. That's what you aim for. Okay, then keep everything the same, but put your shutter speed up to a 200th of a second or whatever your sync speed is, but 200 is probably a good thing to aim for. 200th of a second, and just take another shot to show that the shot is totally dark, because increasing the shutter speed has blocked out all the ambient light. Okay, but that's fine. Leave the shutter speed on 200th of a second, and then don't change anything else, but put your flash on. The flash is here quite close to the flower. Put your flash on and adjust the flash power. Only change the flash power on manual mode on the flash. Change it from 1/2 quarter, 1/16, 32, 1/64, whatever it needs to be to get a correct exposure of the flower. Take that shot. Okay, so then you have a nice sharp shot of the flower. Then put the shutter speed back to 1 second, keep everything else the same, and take the shots of the flower, moving your camera at the time so that you move the camera, and that gets the motion blur. But remember to turn the trigger on to fire the flash now. So don't forget that important step. Put the trigger on and fire in this, and make sure it's syncing with the flash, and move the camera. And as you move the camera, you'll get the blur from the constant lights, giving you a blurry effect of the flower. And you will also, when the flash fires, that burst of light will make the flower go nice and sharp. Okay, so give it a go. And I'm going to grab my camera, I'm going to give it a go here with this flower now. Okay, so first off, I'm going to turn my trigger off, so my flash is not going to fire, and I will do that shot, as I said, at 1 second. So let me do that one. Okay, so whether you can see that, yeah, you can see that turned out correct. Yeah, so if that was not, happened to be at f5.6 on ISO 100, but let me say I started out at f16 and did that shot, it's just going to be too dark. Yeah, so you can just see it, but it's too dark. So in that case, leave the shutter speed on 1 second, make the aperture, keep changing the aperture until you get to the right exposure that you want. So I found I like that one, it's f5.6. So you're going to be different, your light's going to be different powers. Yeah, it closes them, so it's just depending on this light. So do that experiment, 1 second, play around with your aperture and your ISO until you have a 1 second exposure, correctly exposed blurred flower. Okay, now, should they turn my trigger on, put it in. So you can do this with any flash, Yongnuo, Nikon, Canon, whatever. So I've got the trigger here and the flash is there, which I'm going to show you. And it's off to the side a little bit. So let's just make sure that that is going to fire. Yeah, that's firing. Okay, so I'm going to put my shutter speed up to 200th of a second, leave my aperture at 5.6. Shutter speed 200th of a second, because that'll block out the ambient light, but just give me a flash exposure. Okay, so I get that, for me that's a little bit dark. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to change any settings, I'm going to make the flash power a little bit brighter. I'm going to change it from 1/64 to 1/, let's try 16. Yeah, so now I have a nice bright, even if I move the camera when I take that shot, as you can see, I still have a sharp picture of a flower because the flash duration is so fast. I'm not getting any of this ambient light because the shutter speed is at 200th of a second. The burst of flash is freezing the movement. And then what we do is we change now. So now I don't change anything. I leave my aperture at 5.6 and I change my shutter speed back to 1 second. 1 second, and I take the shot and I move my camera and experiment with doing different movements with the camera. Twist it, move it to the side, move in. Okay, you get the picture. And then, yeah, so I'll show you some pictures now, and that's what that looks like. So you get the movement from the ambient light, the constant ambient light, but that could be LED, whatever, standard lamp, torches, whatever it is, and the flash. Okay, so yeah, give it a go.